Thank you, everyone. Good evening and welcome to this Dr. Seuss Foundation session in connection with PEACH, which is an early childhood collaborative with higher education faculty. I'd like to start our session with a land acknowledgement message from Dr. Sandy Kewanhaptua Dixon, a member of the Hopi Nation. Dr. Dixon, please share your message. Hello, Dr. Sandy. I think you're on mute.
Sharing their screen needs to share their audio.
Dr. Sandy, can you share audio, please, so that we can hear your message?
Sorry about that. Let me fix that.
Of joining your organization today. I'm going to begin with the land acknowledgement and in reference to a California land acknowledgement that we also use at Cal Poly Pomona. We recognize that we gather on the territorial and ancestral lands of Native California Indians. Cal Poly Pomona and other places acknowledge the Gabalingo Tongva people as the traditional land caretakers of Tovangar, the Los Angeles Basin, and South Channel Islands.
Okay.
We also acknowledge that this land remains shared space among the Kizh, the Serrano, Cahuilla, Rumsen Ohlone, and Liseño people. We acknowledge the spiritual connection and rights as the original stewards and traditional caretakers of this land. We thank them for their strength, perseverance, and resistance. We recognize that every member of this community has and continues to benefit from the use and the occupation of this land ever since it was taken by the land-grabbing settlers to form the cities we now live and work in. Consistent with our values of reparations, community, and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible our relationship as settlers in relationship to California Native peoples. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty and will work to hold ourselves and the organizations we work on behalf of more attuned to the needs of American Indian Native American peoples where we live, work, and organize. Escalate, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Sandy. I'd like to share my gratitude on behalf of PEACH to Dr. Sandy for that message and acknowledgement. I'd like to also welcome everyone this evening, participants, especially because without you, we wouldn't have a workshop, and to all those who participated in facilitating this session, as well as those behind the scenes. I'd like to direct our participants this evening to the chat box where you will find a link to prompts for this evening. Those are a few key items that will prompt your thinking and help the facilitators to guide
you're right. You may know it's good for
your interests.
Right.
I advise everyone to mute so that we can maximize the bandwidth this evening. My name is Dr. Martine Jago, and I'm director of this project. We are part of PEACH. PEACH is a higher education faculty collaborative, so cross-sector, and we've been working together now for just over 10 years as a group. And we have been selected as the recipient of grant monies from the Dr. Seuss Foundation to conduct training sessions for trainers of early childhood specialists in multilingual, multicultural development through an anti-racist lens. So Peach team members have developed and are offering a series of 6 virtual 2-hour professional development workshops for you in higher education faculty in the field of early childhood development throughout California on language acquisition, literacy development in multilingual classrooms.
So it might do
In the
that.
workshops, it's intended that they will build on your strengths, prior knowledge, and adult learning approaches. There are 3 other workshops after this evening, so we hope that you'll join us again on February 21st. We have session number 4 called Facilitating Language and Literacy in Diverse Communities. On March 21st, 1 month later, we have session 5 on reflection and exploration of responsive curricula. And finally, April 25th, we have culturally responsive observation and assessment. And we hope you can join us for those sessions. I'd like to share just a few words about Dr. Seuss and the publications. Dr. Seuss books such as Green Eggs and Ham and The Cat in the Hat resonate for children and adults more than 30 years after the author's death in 1991. Theodore Seuss Geisel was born and raised in Springfield, Massachusetts. His books have been translated into many languages, including Braille, and are sold in over 100 countries. Dr. Seuss Enterprises have decided that 6 Dr. Seuss books are no longer to be published due to racist images and culturally insensitive content. Further, Dr. Seuss Enterprises has reported that an inclusive group of new authors and artists representing a diverse cross-section of the population will create a new series of children's books that include original stories inspired by original Dr. Seuss sketches from archives at the University of California, San Diego. In this way, Geisel's legacy of motivating young readers, writers, and artists can continue with illustrated tales firmly focused in anti-bias and anti-racism going forward. I'd like to share now the names of those who are going to be working with you this evening. My colleagues, Cindy Stevens, Regina Lamourelle, and Michelle DeJohnette. And I'd like to now pass the baton to them so that you can learn from them and with them and work together for the next 90 minutes.
Am I going first?
Yeah, Michelle.
Hi, my name is Michelle DeJohnette. I am so happy to be here and love being a collaborator with Peach and their mission and vision. I am a faculty member in the Early Childhood Studies Department at Cal Poly Pomona.
And I'm Cindy Stevens, and I'm faculty at College of the Canyons in the Early Childhood Education Department. I've been a Peach member in the collaboration since it began, and I'm really proud of the work that we're doing, and I'm proud to be here with Michelle and Regina to present information to you about how you can create more culturally responsible practices in your environments. Regina.
And I'm Regina Lamourelle. I'm the co-department chair this semester at Santiago Canyon College, and I'm happy to share with you what I've learned over the course of doing research for this project. And I'm looking forward to this. I will caution you though, when I talk, I'm going to turn my camera off because it's very distracting for me to have to worry about looking, and I have a dog in the background, and also the bandwidth. So I will turn it off so that I can talk and share with you what I've learned in a timely manner. Welcome.
Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the history of systemic racism in preschool and in early childhood education in general. We'll talk about how you can notice bias in your early childhood environment. And then we will end with some strategies to kind of disrupt bias and racism in your environment. And we'll have some Q&A after that, and hopefully we will be able to learn from you as well in terms of what your experiences are in your programs when it comes to bias and racism. Cindy?
So before we embark on this journey tonight, we wanted to talk a little bit about this invitation to a brave space. So I'm going to go ahead and read it. Together we will create brave space, because there is no such thing as a safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars, and we all have caused wounds. In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. You will not be perfect. This space will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together, and we will work on it side by side. Mickey Scott Bay Jones. And the reason we wanted to start with that is because these can be really uncomfortable conversations, and we all are aware of that. We're all on this journey, and we're at different parts of this journey. And so what we're going to offer to you tonight is a part of our journey. And we hope that you will be able to listen to our experiences with openness for your hearts and your mind, and participate in a way that makes sense for you. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some of our creating that brave space. So we're always going to welcome multiple viewpoints. Own your own intentions and impact, which means, we might not know what our intentions are, but when somebody shares how that affected them, I think it's important for us to acknowledge that the impact that we had. Take risks, lean into our discomfort. That's not always easy for us, but I think it's an important aspect into really hearing and seeing others. We're going to practice confidentiality, challenge with care, meaning be curious and open rather than defensive and argumentative. We're going to make space for everyone. And then we're going to actively listen to hear. And we share these. This is something that I use in my classes with my students. I also use the brave space, but is there anything else that we may not have touched on that any of you may need to feel safe or to feel brave in this space? And if you could just take a minute to write that in the chat, that would be great.
And while you're doing that, I'd like to remind everyone that, Cindy, Regina, and I were talking about this earlier today, that many times when we have difficult conversations, especially when it comes to race and culture, sometimes people get uncomfortable in those conversations. And we invite you to just be uncomfortable, and that's okay. That we don't want to shy away from that. We acknowledge that growth happens during that time of discomfort. That when we're comfy and everything is fine and we're feeling okay, then there's not a lot of learning happening, not a lot of movement happening during that time. The movement and the growth happens through the discomfort. So I'd like to start off with a little question for everyone, if you could answer it in the chat. How do you define culture? We know culture, what is really culture can have different meanings for many different people, right? Here in this slide, it says it's easy to describe, but hard to define. So we'd like to learn from you right now, real quickly. how do you define culture? We'll give you a couple of seconds to answer that question in the chat, please. A person's background, history, family genes, family traditions, family beliefs. Background. So a lot of themes around beliefs and family. Food is definitely a big part of one's culture, beliefs, traditions. Absolutely. And I'm going to ask Cindy to share a little bit about what she has heard from the comments and that she has heard from colleagues and from students about who has culture and who doesn't.
Thanks, Michelle. We in preparing this for all of you, all three of us have had interesting experiences with this topic. I teach the diversity class, the role of equity and diversity. I also teach child, family, and community, and I'm a California Community College faculty. So for those of you that are familiar with the California Community College, those are the 8 courses that make up our AA degree, our AA for transfer. But it's very fascinating to me how many people think of culture as other and that white is the standard. And what I mean by that is that when I ask my students, which are mixed, diverse students, to define their culture, often white people will say, I don't have a culture. And as you can tell, we saw that some of your definitions already indicated that everyone has a culture, right? Family beliefs, all of us have family beliefs, all of us have values, all of us have traditions, all of us have the same thing. It's just that they're different perspectives. And as I was sharing with my colleagues, as being the only white person that's doing this presentation with my 2 Black colleagues, or Black and biracial, sorry, Regina, I think it's important for us to think about that. Oftentimes there's this idea that there's the standard, and what we as a society has is we talk about white supremacy, not as something that is meaning that we're racist or we're it's not that hate, it's just that that's how we view culture, and that this is the standard and all other is from a deficit lens. And Regina's going to talk more about that, but I think it's really important for us to think about that in the ways in which we interact with our population of students, whether they're adult students or children and families that we're serving. We need to be inclusive and to be respectful of everyone's culture, and then also to be able to look at who we are and define ourselves so that we know who we are, so that we can be open and willing and open to all the possibilities. So I hope that kind of captured, Michelle, what we were talking about. We've had some really interesting conversations, and I'm just going to add that I think that that's the beauty of being in communities of practice, is to really listen to hear. And boy, we've had some great conversations.
Yeah, we have. And just one more thing I'd like to add before we go forward is that we also want to be sure to understand that no one culture or race is monolithic, right? And what that means is that everyone, culture is nuanced, right? And so we can say that, let's say, arroz con pollo is a Mexican food dish, right? Has Mexican ethnicity and culture and tradition. But we wouldn't say that every Mexican person loves arroz con pollo, right? We don't know that, right? And so there are ethnic culture and religious culture, right? And there's also your neighborhood culture, right? Your own family culture that you could create that's different than the family of origin where you grew up, right? You might create your own traditions and your own values and beliefs. So we don't generalize that every community is all the same in their culture, right? Thanks, Cindy.
Can I comment, Cindy? There's a comment in the chat that says, I'm confused. White supremacy is part of a culture. Did I mishear?
You want me to
I'll
take that,
address
Cindy?
that. No, it's
Okay,
it's
go
not
ahead.
it's not a part of a culture, but it's white supremacist thinking, meaning that that's the standard. So I think what happens, and what we were trying to point out, is that if I believe that this is the monolithic, and that was really well put, Michelle, this monolithic way of being, like, this is how families should be, this is how gender should be, this, all of those kinds of things, that often comes from the society, and which I'm going to be controversial, but I'm going to say it, in which there's white supremacist thinking, meaning that that's the standard, and all other is there's that look through as a deficit lens, and we're gonna dig deeper into that. So bear with us. Thank you for that question. That was a really good question. So yeah. So, and thank you, Nancy, for monitoring the questions, because it's a little bit hard to do it all.
Happy to do that.
So I want, our original title for this talk was about culturally responsive practice, right? And as Cindy said, we've had many conversations, really awesome conversations, where I think you're right, Cindy, we do listen to hear, and we bounce things off of each other. And one thing that, for me, the word responsive didn't really sit right with me. And so I shared that with Cindy, that I am having an issue with using the terminology culturally responsive. I think we should be culturally responsible. And to me, those had two very different meanings, right? When we talk about being responsive, it gave me the feelings that Cindy was speaking about a few minutes ago about othering different people, right? And we respond to other cultures, right? As if they're not part of America. They're not part of us. They're, it's another way of othering them. I had the feeling of, you somebody rings your doorbell and you respond to them. They're on the outside. And you might think I'm being kind of picky or really picking apart language in that way, but words are meaningful to me. Absolutely. Anna just said she feels the same way about the word tolerance. Thank you. She's hearing me. Absolutely, Anna. I agree with you 100%. So when we're being culturally responsive and we're responding to someone who is of another culture or another belief or religion or what have you, we're being culturally responsible in our pedagogy, then we are taking ownership of our own responsibility in being inclusive, in learning about different cultures other cultures that are different than our own. And we are understanding that we have a responsibility to make sure that everyone feels welcome in the environment that we're in. So that's the difference for me. And I thank you for that comment. I wonder if any other participants have some thoughts on the difference between responsive or responsible, or is there anything you had ever thought about before?
If you'd like to comment, you can raise your hand, but I want to add something. I've been working with a group of young women going through this book called Me and White Supremacy, and it's about being responsible to our ancestries, right? And it's really evolved my thinking about the ways in when Michelle brought up this idea of being responsible. I really heard her, and I think that that's something we need to really think deeper about. And I want you to know that every time I put culturally responsible pedagogy, it wants me to change it to responsive. So I think that's really interesting that we're creating something new, Michelle, or you're creating something new. So I do see some chat.
Yeah, Eva said that she never thought of it that way. Thank you for saying that, Eva. Yeah.
I hadn't either, but it makes good sense because being responsive just means that you're responding to somebody else's cues. Being responsible means you're taking charge of your beliefs, your feelings, and your actions, and you're willing to act upon to change what's happening, not to respond to what's out there or what the feedback. So I think it's more responsible.
Right.
Looking at your response to these issues.
Right. And I think
and I like what Carmen just said, because I think sometimes responsive it's a reaction. We're going to talk about that too.
Yeah.
And a little bit later.
And that's also an excellent way to put it. Being responsive, right? And then again, we're putting the onus on that person. Whereas no, we need to take responsibility, especially as faculty members, as practitioners. We are responsible for the reading and the education and the understanding of what's new. So thank you for that. So now we're going to talk a little bit about bias and racism in early childhood education. I teach anti-racism and equity in the early childhood department at Cal Poly Pomona. And the one thing I have heard over the years as in doing this work is we need to talk about race and racism with young children, with preschoolers. And yes, we do. Yes, we do. And the reason for that is because our school system and our early care and education system has a long history of racism, of public schooling being set up for white students. And then, we know that there was a time when students of color were not legally allowed to be educated. And then, we had segregated schools. And so there's a long history of differing students and limiting access and opportunity to education according to their race. And so we're going to talk about how that history of racism and segregation has led us to where we are now, where we're still seeing evidence of continued suspensions and expulsions, exclusionary discipline, differences in school education, graduation rates, and those types of things that are rooted in racism and bias. And Dr. Lamourelle is going to tell us more about our ways of thinking and how we can change that in our pedagogical practice.
Thank you, Michelle and Cindy. This is a subject that's dear to my heart because I have both in my family people of color and actually some grandchildren that appear white. And it's really interesting that how two groups are treated differently, and I'll share a little bit as we go on. But before I get into that, understanding how the social brain responds to others is important for teachers to unpack their unconscious biases. If we intend to change how we interact with students, the work begins with us changing how we ourselves think about and interact with our environment. Our brains, and I will introduce a lot of information here about brains because everyone that knows me knows that I just can't not be a brain junkie. It doesn't matter what I do. So I hope you don't mind, but it's very interesting to me just to add the brain information where I can, because really racism starts in our brains. Our brains are wired for interactions, and the values that we learn through our cultures keep our brains calm. These are implicit, they're stored deep in our brains. And to become more culturally aware, we must begin to recognize that the scope of the problem, our unconscious biases, really mean that we need to confront our personal biases of how we look at things. So let's get started with Moses' story. And while I'm telling his story, I'd like you to think about what you would do as a teacher to deal with the bias that the student is experiencing. What steps do you think that the teacher could take to bring her classroom more towards social justice and introduce this concept to her preschool classroom? Michelle mentioned that people think that these kids are too young to learn about bias. Believe me, they already know more about bias than some of us think by the time they walk into school than we believe. And then the last question is, what should the teacher do to reassure this child that he is safe and valued? Moses' story. Moses was born on January 24th, 2018. He entered Universal Preschool September 15th, 2022, when he was 4 years, 8 months old. He was a fourth of 5 children, a boy, and he'd never attended preschool before because he was carried at home by a very loving grandmother, aunts, uncles. He was breastfed, walked at 14 months, and was placed in his half-day kindergarten class in a predominantly Anglo school in Orange County, California. He was a happy, kind child and loved to his cars and his dolls. And he couldn't wait to go to school like his big brother and his sister. He was just waiting to go to school. Moses also speaks Spanish and English because his paternal grandmother is Hispanic. After about 2 weeks in school, the teacher reported to his mom that she was worried about him because he was inattentive and he was aggressive, and that he was getting into trouble, that she believed that he needed some behavioral services. She stated that he was all over the place and wouldn't sit still with his group. And when his mother shared with the teacher that he had some comments made about his skin color, before he went to school, he loved his hair. He loved his skin color, and he came home one day and said he hated his skin color and his hair was ugly, and he wanted straight hair like his classmates and his siblings. Anyway, the teacher kept focusing on him not being good in the classroom and sitting still during group time. When she was told about his problem with being called names by other students there, the teacher said, well, she didn't hear anything about it, so therefore she ostensibly could not deal with it. So this was actually a real rude awakening, because Moses has just now become a part of the real world of what happens to the Black children. You can move to the second slide here. I'll come back to the thing here. He's become a part of the real world where Black children are suspended more than other children. They're imprisoned more, from the school to the prison pipeline. They attend more underfunded schools with poorly qualified teachers. They are treated more like they are more responsible than their peers for the same age. And this was verified in a Georgetown study called the Erasure of Girl Blackhood, but it's also for Black males also. But in general, Black children are not treated, even at the preschool era, like other children. As Moses, who came from a very loving home with a family that cared for him, who spoke 2 languages. He has siblings who are biracial. He has aunts and uncles who are both white and Hispanic. So he comes from a multicultural household, which had no idea that the real world out there was less forgiving of who he was as a person. So if you can put in the chat there, what do you think some of the real issues were for the teacher? We're going to pick this up towards the end with another way of looking at this. But what do you think ostensibly, what could be the real problem? So you can write that in the chat, and someone who's monitoring the chat will let us know, read the comments for us while we continue here. While you're doing that, I'd like to play an update of the doll experiment. I sent this as something that you could look at before, but most of you may have looked at this. This is a study that was done back in the 40s, ostensibly. It actually served as the justification for Brown versus the Board of Education to prove that separate but equal was not separate and was not equal. This is an updated version of the experiment. So let's take a look at it. Is it going to play? Because I can't see it on my computer.
Is it on there? I think
Yes.
I have to reshare. Hold on.
No, it's not.
Okay.
We'll let you know when it's on.
Okay, well, I can't see what's next. I don't know what's before that. So I'll just-
Is it on now?
No, now, yes, now, but it's an ad right now. Save time and money at Walmart. There you go. Now it's on.
Listen, there's a good chance somebody's trying to hack your website right now. You
No,
gotta
it's not on. It's still an
There
ad.
we go. This is it.
Experiment that changed the course of U.S. history, helping to desegregate schools. And all it took were some kids and some baby dolls. Now, more than 60 years later, would the results be any different? Will Uick has that story.
I don't really know what about it stuck with me.
Texas A&M assistant professor Dr. Tony Sturdivant first heard about Dr. Kenneth and Mamie Clark's doll experiments as an undergrad and has been thinking about it ever since.
I remember wondering if things were different, what would happen.
The study questioned over 200 African-American children from 3 to 7 years old about black and white baby dolls.
Saying things like, give me the doll that you would like to play with, or give me the doll that looks bad.
What they found was startling.
2/3 of the children selected the white dolls for positive attributes and the black dolls for negative attributes.
The study showed that children as early as 3 are able to pick up on societal messages, and Dr. Kenneth Clark used that research as an expert witness in Brown versus Board of Education, demonstrating that separate but equal really wasn't equal when it generates a feeling of inferiority.
Some of the children actually were visibly upset with having to say that the black doll looked like them.
Now, more than 6 decades after that experiment, Dr. Sturdivant decided to see if anything has changed.
I didn't just include a white and black doll, I also included the Latina doll.
She observed a multiracial Texas school for a semester, 13 students, 4 dolls, and salon props.
Instead of asking children which one is the bad doll or whatever, I just placed the dolls in their classroom.
She took notes and followed up with some clarifying questions. And what she found,
black dolls were stepped on, black dolls were cooked in pots.
Was pretty much the same startling thing the Clarks found all those years ago.
The children still had this pro-white bias that the Clarks found earlier in their studies. So the black dolls had afro curly hair. So they would say, I don't want to play with that doll because it's curly.
Dr. Sturdivant says although school desegregation was a good first step and may have helped, the work is far from done. And one of the ways to help kids and society move forward
it's okay to talk to their kids about race and feel good about their background.
Is as simple and easy as talking.
We do have data to support that adult silence about race fosters feelings of anti-Blackness in not just Black children, but all children, because as children are always learning, always.
Will Uick, 3 News.
We're back with the presentation. As you can see, even though time has passed, not much has changed in the way of how children view other children of a different color, especially Black children and white children. It seems that still the black doll gets treated more inappropriately than the white doll. And these are preschool children, so you have to believe that they've seen a lot around them that have caused them to form these attitudes, because the children don't grow up in a vacuum. They come from cultures that we either define in some circles as being collectivist or individualist, and that's only for the sake of if you can identify with what those attributes mean at the top of the PowerPoint, then you can see how, depending on which culture you grow up in, your view of the world might be a little bit different. The cultures help us, whether or not we looking at how children are believing and speaking and talking about others, depending on how they're socialized, their default setting will be constructed to keep their world safe. The unfamiliar ones will be viewed by the brain as a threat, which is a threat to your survival. And the ones that conform to your cultural view will be safe, and your brain will be happy with that. So the minute that you take a decision or a direction or a belief that's outside of what your brain has now intrinsically ingrained as normal for your cultural or for your where you live or your family, then the brain is going to nudge you back into that comfort zone with some behaviors to let others know that, hey, they're wrong, that your culture is the one that's valued. What you need to do is the one that's valued. So your brain is constantly urging us back to these implicit type behaviors. Although these things are stored implicitly in our brains because of repetition around us with the practices that parents have used to bring us up. That doesn't mean that there isn't a way for us to bring these to the conscious level and to be able to look at them openly and honestly and to decide if those are behaviors that we do want to keep, that we should be teaching children about or with, and how we can make a world that's more fair, just, equitable, and works well for everyone. Remember,
Regina, should the slides be up? They're not up.
That's what I'm reading the next slide. I don't know who's dealing with the slide.
The slides should be up.
Yeah, so
Cindy?
I just put in the chat, I'm experiencing some technical difficulties. It's not letting me put it on, I think, because I went to YouTube. So I'm working on it in the background. Sorry about that.
You want me to put them up for now?
Sure.
So what slide are we on?
We're on slide, the collectivism and individualism, what shapes our perceptions. It's slide number 4, I believe.
Oh.
Not 4. That's 4 for you, Michelle.
4 for me. I don't know which one. It's the one right after the doll experiment. It's the one right after that.
Okay, I will get to it. Is this it?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so now you can see the part that I was talking about, the different cultures. Depending on which culture you grow up in, you can see that you have a different view towards the world, how your self-image is, your individual actions. I was on the same note, this goes along with parenting practices around the world. And one culture I was reading is that we in this culture, when babies babble, we want to engage babies, look at them, and we say that's the right way to do it. Well, in some cultures that is not done because teaching children to look directly in the eye is a symbol of disrespect. And that's not what is valuable in the culture. So when babies babble, moms don't have them engage them directly in the eyes. They look away because that's what's valued in the culture. And that is another reason why when we learn about other cultures, that we can evaluate behaviors which we might view as disrespectful or substandard or whatever, we can say, oh, I get it. Maybe in that culture, this is how this behavior is viewed. And the more we learn about other cultures, the more we can be more understanding of behaviors that we see and not judge them with our lens and label them, that we can look at them more openly and honestly, that, hey, this is a variation of culture. Another parenting practice that that would be judged differently here is toilet training. In one culture, I believe it's the Vietnamese, is that the babies are toilet trained in infancy and out of diapers at 9 months. And that would be just the method that is used in order to train babies to respond to the parents' cues to be able to toilet when the parents want them to toilet. We would not view as acceptable in our culture because that's not how we view infancy and childhood. Another culture, younger children actually take care of babies. Once the babies start walking, younger children take care of them. In this culture, that would be viewed as child abuse and neglect. Just even recently, I know that I've had my neighbor want to know if it's okay if she left her 16-year-old home alone while she went shopping somewhere. This is during Christmas, and I had to go out because I couldn't watch it. And I was kind of taken aback by that, but I listened. And I'm thinking, well, 16, when I grew up, 16-year-olds were babysitting other children. But now, because of how we've changed how we look at childhood and how we look at when children are competent to care for other children, 16-year-olds in this neighborhood are getting babysitters. And to me, I thought that was a little bit strange, but again, because I'm looking at it from a lens of having raised my children 30, 40 years ago, not raising them now. So if we get out of making things right based on what we know only, then we will always, I think, be looking at others as lesser than, which unfairly puts them in a position of having to either prove themselves or us to treat them differently, whoever the us are, because they're not responding or acting the way that we would hope they would act.
And I just want to add, as we move to the next slide, that I when you were talking, Regina, it made me think of I'm a grandparent now, and I'm watching my daughter parent in a way that's different than how I parent, and I get to learn her different ways of being. Mine wasn't right. It was the way I did it. And she doesn't have to emulate or copy what I did. She's her own person. So I think that that's really important for us to remember that in the context of cultural responsibility as well.
And that is absolutely true. And part of that, when we to go about this self-reflective study, I think starts with, where do you begin? I believe we begin with the intention, the mirror. The mirror is not them, the mirror is us. Instead of looking outward and figuring out how we can make our class more culturally responsive or responsible for others, we need to look inward and figure out how we can be more responsible for our feelings, our beliefs, and our judgments, and even our actions towards others. In a way, we must name what it is that is the uncertainty so that we can embrace it. If it's shameful, then do that, and to claim it so that it can reframe it. Actually, for me, this brings a good story that I had when my daughter entered Berkeley, and all of in my life, I've been used to calling people of Asian descent Orientals. And so she came home one day and I was talking about an Oriental this and Oriental that. She got really upset, read me the riot act. She says, "Mom, they're not a food. These are Asian people." And so she read me the riot act and whatever. And I was embarrassed. I was a little bit, I felt ashamed. I didn't mean any harm, but that's just what I grew up learning, as how you call people who are from the Pacific Island countries. I didn't know that that was an inappropriate term, but she schooled me. And I had to intentionally think every time I wanted to refer to someone of Asian descent, I had to consciously think of, I'm going to say this right this time. I had to bring my my inappropriate beliefs to the conscious level so that I could be sure that I would not say the inappropriate thing. And you know, and I did that. Over time, it just became second nature. Like anything, you can learn and unlearn. It was hard at the beginning, but you know, in order for me to reframe it, I had to actually take ownership of some of it and to be able to do that. So we got to be intentional about what it is that is something that we might need to work on. And in order to do that, since a lot of these beliefs that end up being socially inappropriate are implicit, which means they're housed deep in our brains. They've been there since forever. We don't remember how they got there or the series of actions and things around us that put them there. So in order for us to be able to deal with them, we have to bring them to a conscious level so that we can evaluate them, own it, change it if that's what needs to be. Another way to do this is not do it by yourself. And that's the other thing. This isn't something that we need to be shameful in the sense that we need to hide away and not tell anyone. You're on the right one. Is that we need to consult with others, colleagues like what we're talking now, share stories, ask for their feedback. People who are going along this journey who are willing to help you see what may or may not be appropriate for your journey. Read books about other people, read books both for yourself and also read them to children, that people who've conquered similar challenges and journeys and challenges. But really doing all that is fine if you don't act. A lot of times people do all the reading work and the grunt work and the school work, but they don't really act. They don't change how they act. You can't really change your heart or your mind or affect those of others if you don't act. So taking action would be the part to do that. Philosopher Leo Tao said the journey begins of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. The first step is looking at what we believe, how it affects our interactions around us, and give a fair appraisal of ourselves with the intention that we're going to change what needs to be changed to move ahead. Okay, the next slide is.
It's about self-examination, Regina. I know you're looking at your.
Yeah, so self-examination, that's how we get there. It's all about self-reflection on your culture. And there is a handout which will be available that is given, that it's one that's done by the speech and hearing group, where they have people assess their culture and how culture might affect their decisions. So to do an honest reflection of your culture. Take a look at what you value at your home, how what you do, how it affects children and the families that are around you. If you happen to be a person who comes from a white American culture, I think that's a little bit more difficult because of what Cindy said earlier. A lot of people believe that they don't have a culture. I remember a few years ago when we were in a class and we were going over what African-American families do and Asian families, Hmong families, and there was a whole several chapters in our book on each one of these families. There were no chapters in our book on about white families. So I asked the white people in my class, so tell us about white families. I could tell everybody was a little bit uneasy, and I couldn't get anybody to tell me what white families do, what they think, how they raise their children, what they value, none of that. And so I finally did get one young man who raised his hand. He says, well, if we talk about that, that means we're racist. And I go, no, you're just telling me the beliefs that you've learned about your family, about things that you do, what you celebrate, what values, what is good parenting for certain things. If you have all of these attributes about other cultures, why don't you think that it's possible to give us some information about white American culture? I'm also lucky in that I have children who, my husband was white, as many of you know, my late husband here. And I only say that because we have children that look more like him, two look like him, two look like me. I'm an equal opportunity mom. But what I had the ability to do is that when they went to people's homes, a lot of times they got information about white families and brought them back to me because the people didn't know that that my daughters were, they were mixed. They just assumed that the way they looked, that they had two white parents when they didn't, or they met my husband, didn't meet me, and they met them, and they assumed everything was hunky-dory. So I was able to get some insight into some of the beliefs and how people act by talking with my children over the dinner table. But other people weren't so lucky. So the point is that I think we have to start helping our Anglo children tell us and show us and get in touch with their cultural beliefs, because the only way we can change some of them that might be offensive, I know everybody's worried about the white supremacist part. There are white supremacist beliefs in white American cultural families. That doesn't mean that all families feel that way, but those are some of the beliefs. And the only way to confront them are to bring them to the conscious mind, talk about them, and change them where you can change them.
And this is where we discussed, the three of us really got into this part about, because that's the reason that oftentimes our white families can't see themselves as having a separate culture. And as Michelle said at the beginning, I really want to put this forward, that no culture is a monolith. Everyone within that culture has different belief systems, different ideas. Just think about what's happening in our society today. So I think to the point that Regina was making about, and this is one of the things that I didn't really care about when I teach child, family, and community, and that is to say, this is how Black families are. This is how, that's not true. No family is the same. Every family has their own, they may share some similar beliefs, they may share some similar values, but within any culture, any race, there is just as many differences, just as there is, just as there is human beings. And so I think that it's really important for us, again, this self-examination helps us to examine our beliefs so that we, and someone said they love that, claim it to reframe it. That's really key. What we're really talking about here is claiming our own ideas, our own thought processes, our own ways of thinking, and to reimagine all the possibilities, because there isn't one way of being. And when we approach in that one way of being, we isolate, we dismiss others, we create barriers. There's so many things that we're seeing that we can eradicate, which is what we're really trying to get out by creating this foundation. How can we move? How can we change this narrative so that children aren't harmed, Black and brown children aren't harmed, and that all children are served equitably in early learning programs? Next slide.
Okay, another way to get at changing what we believe is to broaden your perspective. Difference is not deficit or delinquent. If we change our mindset, sometimes that's the source of the problem. When we think what's called deficit thinking paradigm, then when we think that something that's different is inferior are not like, because it's not like what we do or how we're used to it, we are not looking at the total picture of the humanity of the person who happens to be there. Like someone who speaks a different language isn't mentally deficient because they don't speak English with a perfect accent or use the right words or the verbs or whatever. Foreign accent or limited English is not a reflection of intellectual capacity or ability to communicate in a native language. We know we need to understand the difference between a communication disability and a communication difficulty. They're not the same. I know it just used to frustrate me to no end when I have some friends who were not native speakers of English, and I have other people that didn't know that. The minute they heard them speak English, they started talking louder as though they had a hearing problem. They didn't really have a hearing problem. They were learning English. And actually, I remember when I had one student who wrote on her paper, she was writing about, it was an observation that she was doing, and she wrote the sentence, "The boy was good." And I didn't flip out. I understood why she wrote that. It reminded me of her children learning, that are first learning English, that over-regularize verbs. And we go through some of the same processes when we learn a new language as children do. I know because I learned both French and German as adults, and I'm pretty sure I sounded like a 3-year-old. In fact, I had 3-year-olds correcting me in France. I sounded like that when I started learning the language. Fortunately, they were patient enough till I got better, and I ended up speaking French pretty good, but had help from my husband because he was French, and German in Germany. But the point being is that because someone is different doesn't mean that that's deficient. Difference is just that. Different means it's not like something else. It has its own attributes, its own pluses, its own value, and they don't need to be compared or made to feel lesser than. Nothing is linguistically inferior just because it sounds different. And when you think about it, a lot of times when we want to have children of all schools and all communities perform the same, and they may not perform the same, we don't consider what these children may have gone through. Institutional racism, the social inequities, unfair school policies, differential treatment in the classroom. All of that can be limiting the success of students of color. I can remember one of my children who happened to look like me. She says, "Mom, I'm always in trouble. I get called on more by the teacher, or she gets put in, used to get, things taken off on her report card or whatever because she talked loud and she was always disruptive." Well, she has a loud voice, but there were other people that had loud voices. They didn't look like her. And that's kind of, unfair, but it was a reality. So we worked through that. We helped the teachers work through that. Fortunately, I had some teachers who were very willing to work through that and hadn't thought about it that way. One of them admitted that I had never thought about it that way. And it's good when people can admit that, hey, I didn't think about it that way, but now that you mention it, that could be something that I need to address. Next slide. What I think is important to look at when we look at changing and what we want to fix or improve and being more culturally responsible is what it is that we're looking at. The school culture, does it support the intellectual capacity of all students? Does it create a safe classroom so that all students can access their academic credential? Did Moses feel safe in his classroom? No, he did not. I know he did not feel safe. He was, he's better now, but he wasn't quite sure. And that leads us to another thing. I'll bring this up again here, but as long as I remember it, is that part of his moving about, in my opinion, was, think about it. If you were constantly being taught by somebody telling you that you're ugly, and your hair is ugly, and you have 1 or 2 children that are constantly telling you that, when you move to get away from them, I would probably have some motion behavior problems too, because it's not natural for people to stay around people that make them feel unsafe or who are causing them such angst by being unkind and saying things that really make them feel bad or make them not feel like they're part of the group. A lot of times teachers may make those types of attributions unwittingly. Some may do it knowingly, some may do it unknowingly, which results in a lesser opportunity for children who are different, diverse, or who are not like the majority of students in the classroom. Next slide.
I'm curious, Regina and the rest of our group, because we are going to be doing a workshop. I think our last workshop is observing through cultural lenses. And, that was one interpretation that Regina had. There could have been lots of interpretations why Moses was acting that way. Maybe he just wanted to have fun. I mean, yes, it wasn't a safe environment for him, that we know. But the teacher also wasn't observing him as Moses. That teacher was observing him with a deficit lens. And so I think that we have to be really careful about just coming up with one reason why a children's behaving in the way that they are. And also, are our expectations appropriate? Like Regina said at the beginning, he never went to preschool. He was almost 5. Why wouldn't he want to be active? Isn't that what they are? I'm here with my grandchild, and I spent all day watching him. He hasn't felt good today. He has been doing all kinds of things that I think if someone were looking at him from a different lens, they would assume that it was a behavior problem rather than what he was, is he was just trying to explore. So I think it's really critical for us to really focus on what our lens is, so that we don't misinterpret the behavior of children. And not only that, is to get with families, to talk to, instead of that teacher talking to Moses's mom like that teacher did, that teacher could have asked Moses's mom questions. This is what I'm seeing. What do you know? What do you see at home? So that's part of being culturally responsible for the children and families that we serve.
And you're absolutely correct that when we get towards the end of this, I'll make a statement about that again, but you're absolutely correct. And that's part of when we become reflective and looking for more than one possible cause for behavior, rather than labeling it on because they don't speak English, or they're African-American, or he's an African-American male, or whatever the issue is. To think about more than one reason why he could be acting that way. I don't know exactly why he was acting that way, because I wasn't there. I was just giving an assessment of what I think could be a reason why he's acting the way he was acting. Another reason, which I don't know if I shared with you, this happened to be an outdoor classroom. This wasn't indoors. So if you're in an outdoor classroom, depending on how that is set up and controlled, you're actually inviting children to move and be busy. That's also one possibility too. It just could have been a mismatch for him. Now, had he been already in school, like a lot of the other children have already gone to preschool, then he would have probably learned that, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do. But not having had that experience, for him, if you're outside, hey, I climb trees, I run, I jump, what's the problem? But you're absolutely correct. I think the responsible thing to do is not just to settle on one reason why behavior may be happening, is you get 1 or 2 reasons, talk to other people who may have similar experiences, or who can observe for you and give their input, because the more information, the better, more points of view, the better. Part of this is part of process of broadening your view, but not just sticking with one of those things. But the first place to begin with is just looking at what you're observing, looking at the facts, not your interpretation, not somebody is bad because the behavior is so-and-so is running and moving and XYZ happened. Not that they were bad and they weren't paying attention, and whatever other things that you could think of is the reason why they could be causing a problem. Another example was if you had 2 students, a little bit older students, and they happened to one child speaking to another child just before a test. Molly, who happened to be a white female, had the highest grade in the math class. DeAndre, who was a basketball player, was her friend. They were talking in the back of the room. The math test was to begin in 5 minutes. And Molly smiled at her friend and said, "Oh, Sarah, I got you." And that was in reference to something they were going to do afterwards, not the test. The teacher is already ready to discipline them for cheating. I think that this teacher could have waited to see what would happen, what grade people were going to get on the test, how the outcome, but she didn't have to immediately go to oh, they must be cheating. Maybe they were just friends and they just said, hey, hey, I got you. From my understanding of what actually they were talking about, it had nothing to do with the classroom. It had something to do they were going to do after class. It just happened to be that the math test occurred after this. So we've got to, I think, look at our behavior. Again, a lot of changing to be more responsible in the classroom as far as race and cultural issues go, that we've got to be more responsible by looking at more than one way that we can look at this behavior, not just looking at just making it up as we go along, or what we think it ought to be because of the way someone looks. Then we can mindfully reflect, and that's what Cindy was doing, is looking at did that make sense? Were there other reasons why Moses could have been out of not doing what he was supposed to do? And it's going to take time. This is not going to happen overnight. We tend to want to solve every problem right then and there, but it might take us reflecting and looking and trying on different scenarios more than once and talking with more than one person before we can come up with a reasonable solution as to what is happening. The other thing that's interesting to note is that when we get triggered by these types of behaviors that are out of sync with our culture, they trigger in our brains the sense of a reward or a threat. That's highly addictive, and that's why we pay attention to them, because our brain wants the thing solved, and the brain will reward you by putting you back in your comfort zone. If you go back to your intrinsic biases and don't challenge me for what I believe, then if we change that. And that's something we need to be mindful of, is just because it might feel good or feel like you want to do it doesn't mean that you should give in to that. That's just your brain way of telling you, I've been used to looking at life this way. You're changing how you're going to look at it. That's making me uncomfortable. I don't have a pattern for this. I'm uncomfortable. So
a couple of things that we talked about when we were discussing this also was that this idea of pausing, postponing our action until serenity emerges. I think oftentimes when we're triggered, we get defensive, right? So we have to explain ourselves, or we don't. And it's okay to pause. You can pause in your adult classrooms. You can pause with children, take a deep breath, think about what is it that's bothering me, and why is it bothering me? Another approach you can do is you can ask somebody when they say something, can you help me understand what you meant by that? Because oftentimes we misinterpret what people say. We think that they're saying something about us when they're just saying something about their experience. And so we want to offer now some, thanks Michelle for putting that in the chat. We want to offer some different strategies that we thought about. And then we'd like to open it up for questions, because we want you to participate. We realize that you've been sitting attentively listening, and so I think you can go to the next slide. And is there anything else you wanted to say, Regina? I'm sorry.
No, I think that you covered it there. That's fine. Okay. They can read the wrap-up slide. We'll get to it when we get their idea, so we're fine.
Yeah. So we talked about and this is the point where Michelle and Regina, the three of us, are going to kind of just, round robin here. But we talked about some of the environment in an early learning center. And I'm just going to say that this is also true of a learning environment. If you're in a grade school, if you're in a junior high, if you're in a high school, or if you're in a college, it might not be as nuanced. But when you have an environment, you want to say to the people in that environment, you belong here. It's not the teacher's environment, it's the learning community's environment. And so in terms of early childhood, what we think about is, when we look at our environment, do I see, when that child and family walks in the room, do they see themselves? Do they see their family, the images of their family in the program, in the classroom, on the walls, so that when they walk in, there's a sense that, oh, this is a brave space, safe place for me, and I'm seen here. I don't want to take this all up. I know Michelle and you had some ideas about this too, so jump in.
You're doing a great job. I would have said the same thing. We really wanted to talk about the environment in general, in terms of being culturally responsible and being equitable, right? So yes, like Cindy said, your families, the the children, students should see themselves in the learning environment. That's very important. If you have, for example, in talking about language and literacy in this program, in this series, that's an important part of an early childhood environment, right? When we create our libraries and, are they reflective of the people who are a part of that learning community? And that's everyone, staff, teachers, parents, adults, whatever, guardians, and the children are all part of that learning community and should always see themselves. So for example, if you have a very diverse group of children in your kindergarten class, and you look at your library and most of the images are children who have blonde hair and blue eyes, we might want to address that, right? Do we have books that reflect the families in the program? Do all of your books have language that refer to mom and dad? But you have some children who, were adopted, or who have same-sex parents, or who are being raised by their grandparents. All of these different ways that family is created, right? We want to make sure that it's all represented in the learning materials, in the games, in the books, in the what's on the walls, those types of things, the language that we speak. If there are families that speak lots of different languages in your programs, is that represented in the labeling, in the conversation at lunchtime, the foods that we're eating? Are we trying new things? Are we learning new things in terms of food and culture, and how different people like to eat different things, right? And again, even in the same culture. I taught for several years. During my doctoral program, I was an adjunct at San Diego State University, and we had a complaint from one of the parents about something that happened in the children's center, and they were eating quesadillas for lunch with the young children. One of the children had a hard time saying quesadilla. Quesadilla is a big word, right? And one of the children had trouble saying it, but then what the teacher said something that felt dismissive to one of the parents. It was like, oh, you could just call it a cheese roll. And that parent was offended because it seemed like this teacher dismissed everything about that learning moment, right? Even if the child said quesadilla incorrectly, that's okay. She's 3. We could still keep saying quesadilla correctly and she'll pick up on it sooner or later, but dismissing the rich culture and that belong to that food and that learning about, she could have talked all about quesadillas and how they taste and where they come from and who likes them, and got children to raise their hand and who had ever eaten one before and who has eaten them their whole lives, and all of these things that could have made up that learning moment was dismissed when that teacher said, oh, just call it a cheese roll, right? So these are the things that we want to make sure that we're being responsible in our cultural practice and pedagogy.
I think too, if I might interrupt, and this might be controversial, I think it's also responsible to introduce diverse ways of being, of seeing and doing things, even if you have a classroom that's predominantly of children of the same cultural group, racial group, economic status. I think it's unrealistic to have children of any group to live in a world thinking that the whole world is going to be like them. It may be in your neighborhood, it may be in your school, but it's a diverse world out there. You're going to have to live in the world. You're not always going to live in your neighborhood. And learning about other people and learning how to value them, bring other dolls and things into the program, I think are real important. I used to have a preschool out in the community here, and it's predominantly upper class white families. And it was really interesting. I had one Asian mom who had, her daughter had this black doll, and I was really intrigued by it. She came to school with the black doll. And so I thought at first it was one of our dolls that the child had taken home. So I talked with the mom and we were talking about the doll. And she said, oh, she just loves her Mimi. She called the doll Mimi, and I happen to be Mimi, the grandmother. But she said she just loves her Mimi. And I go, okay. I said, so do you mind me asking a question? You're Asian. Why would you buy your child a African American doll? Because in the stores around here, they're mainly white dolls. They're not any black dolls. That's the way they're stocked. And she says, well, that's the one she wanted. And I go, well, it works for me. But this parent was very realistic in that she says, well, we're going to have friends. She's going to have friends when she goes to school of all different races. So she might as well get used to all kinds of people now. And mom said something to that effect. But a lot of parents don't do that. They surround their children with dolls and books and images of people that look like them. Schools where they're predominantly one race, a lot of times, whether they're white or Hispanic or whatever, they're surrounded by people who look like them. And I think we have to realize that it works both ways, that we need to make sure we have those culturally appropriate artifacts in the room, whether or not the group of children is reflective of there. We need to make sure that we include the world and bring the world sometimes in there, because children will be better for it. Anyway.
You know, I remember in the
I'm sorry.
1980s when I was first introduced to anti-bias education from Pacific Oaks. And in the video, because I do show it in my class, one of the teachers talks about how, well, we can't do that because we don't have those children here. And that's fascinating because the children exist everywhere. And that's not always, but that's been a big excuse for not bringing in diversity. And what we're doing is harming children, because I just want to reiterate that it not only harms children of color, it harms white children too. Because it separates us and it doesn't allow them to see the possibilities. And so we don't always have to have, we can bring in, like, there's so many children's books today that bring in all of these opportunities for children to experience diversity. Anti-Racist Baby, Goodnight Racism. I mean, these are all books that should be read to all children, not just children of color. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that when we look at the next slide. In fact, Nancy, why don't you go to the next slide? Is that okay, Michelle?
One thing I wanted to mention was that, yes, so this is perfect.
And then actually, wait, Nancy, I'm going to go ahead and share. So go ahead and stop sharing and then I'll share. Okay, go ahead, Michelle.
So when you all were talking, two things came to mind, and that Louise Derman Sparks has a book. It's called What If All the Kids Are White? And that is an excellent resource that speaks to exactly what Regina was referring to. We do want to make sure that all children learn about all different people in this world, and they don't grow up thinking that everyone looks like them. And we've all been socialized in this, in what is normal and what is not. And so that is a great resource. Also, Cindy, because I know you're going to be creating the resources to share later. One thing that I also want to add is that, and I can't believe we didn't add it to this presentation, was the concept of windows and mirrors. And we'll make sure that you get that information and what that means, because that's also very important in terms of when we talk about children need windows and mirrors in their classrooms, is because we want to create literacy and hands-on experiences and lessons that show them, that are windows, which means that I can look out and I see others. I see the world outside the window. And then I also experience mirrors. I see myself in the learning environment. So that's what we mean by windows and mirrors. And we'll add resources that give you that information.
Well, if I might share, I am an example of that. I always wanted to be a medical doctor. I grew up in Jim Crow, West Virginia, went to segregated schools until I was 13. And I kind of gave up my dream because I didn't see any African-American doctors around me. Nobody ever talked about them. Nobody ever told me it was possible. I thought I would be a trailblazer. It just wasn't going to be possible for me. So had I had an idea that there were African-American doctors. I had no idea that first heart operation was done by an African-American doctor, because none of that was presented, obviously, in schools in West Virginia back during the segregation time. So,
And that's why I'm obsessed with Doc McStuffins, because it's a wonderful children's program, and it shows little Black girls that they can be doctors. Because even with your story and the history in that story, which is great, we still, right now, only 1% of our doctors are Black women. And so, and you're very right. It's hard to imagine yourself being something you can't see.
Yeah. Michelle and Regina, Gloria has her hand up, so I'd like to call on her.
all right, go ahead.
Go ahead, Gloria.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I just want to comment that what Regina, Cindy, and Michelle comment, you know, everything about, you know, like, I love, you know, the moment that they say, you know, like, we have our window, we have mirrors, you know, and the way is a great teaching for the children. And then especially too, you know, there is not only bias, you know, culturally, there is, you know, with the, I've been seeing a lot of bias with the different, with the children with disability too, you know, it's a big thing too, you know, especially, you know, in the years before when I was a teacher, like 25 years ago, we can see, you know, the difference, because parents doesn't like to talk about it, you know, doesn't like to sometimes recognize, you know, that something is happening with their own children. And sometimes, you know, like we always say, you know, we are no doctors, right? When teachers are in the classroom, we are no doctors. So seeing and being that this, you know, the book that she was talking, that Michelle was talking about, and then teaching the children, you know, that let's look at the window and see what we see outside, and look at the mirror to see our own children, you know, in the classroom is very important. And I think so could be a great impact, you know, in our children in this generation, especially, you know, that we have multicultural, you know, in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you, Gloria. That was well said. Estefana, I think that, I don't know if I'm saying your name correctly, but there was something in the chat that you shared, and I'm wondering if you'd share, you said that there's 8 examples or 8 ways that you make sure that children are represented at the center. And I'm just curious if you wouldn't mind sharing with the group what you meant by that.
Yes, so as part of our just enrollment at a lab school and stuff, we were trying to figure out ways to connect our classrooms, because we're different classrooms, but one program. And so we kind of came up with this concept of representing each child in our program in 8 different ways. Part of that is a family picture that they bring in prior to starting school. So we have a family picture of the child. We have family books for every child in the program, and it's throughout the program. It's a way for us to build. And then like they have, we'll take their picture in our program, and we ask parents to give us 3 descriptive words of their child. And so those get posted as well. Maybe we do their image on some blocks. So throughout the classroom, they see themselves represented in 8 different ways.
Thank you for sharing that. That's wonderful. So, you know, this really, we're focusing on language and literacy, and we gave you a whole bunch of information about what that looks like and why it's important. But I do want to add that language and literacy happens in all areas of an early childhood environment. And that's why we wanted to make sure that we covered all the areas. But when you're specifically thinking about what you read to children, how you read it to them, you know, some of the things you want to look at is when you have books in your classroom, and we have many books, is that critically look at what messages might children get from this book. Are they positive messages? Could they be messages that could harm a child? Are they the messages that I want them to receive? Is this my intention in reading this book? Is that's what I want the children? You know, I think oftentimes, I remember when I was first a preschool teacher, we banned Disney books, right? Because Disney books really weren't reading, and they were definitely very genderist and racist, but that wasn't the reason. It was really just about opening up children's possibilities. And the other thing is, and so right now I'm teaching the role of diversity and equity, or equity and diversity in early childhood, and I'm teaching a group of TK teachers who want to work with with that age group. And they've been really giving me some great information. And one of the ways that they were talking about is, and that's what came up, is how can you challenge what children see? So children are seeing this information, and the information could depict stereotypes. Children are critical thinkers. You can look at a book that might have something that has, doesn't make sense, and say to a child, does that seem fair? Does that represent everybody? Allowing children to be a part of that process develops their critical thinking. It develops their empathy. It develops, their connection, their sense of belonging, their sense of social justice. So we don't have to just ban books. It's not like we're saying don't use all these books, but we're saying is use books that definitely depict it. I'm going to stop sharing. I know, Michelle, you want to say something, so I'm going to stop sharing and bring up, well, you looked like I'm going to bring up a couple of websites that are on here, and they will be in the resources where you can look. They're guides for selecting books. So go ahead, Michelle.
No, you know me too well. That's kind of scary. No, what you were just, I wasn't that I wanted to say something, but you were making bells go off in my head, which was really great. And one thing that you were saying, yeah, I was going to send you an email, because I think what you were saying reminded me of the old, when I say old, it's the Pacific Oaks College video that we show a lot. It's about 30 years old.
Yes, 40. It's 40 years old.
Is it 40 years old?
Yeah.
Full disclosure, I graduated from Pacific Oaks, so I might be a little biased, but even though the video was made many years ago, it's still so relevant. And the things that you were talking about, that how we teach children to be social justice advocates, and how children are critical thinkers, and those types of things are shown. And the video is a very practical way to show what we're talking about looks like in an early childhood environment. And we're going to add that to the list of resources.
Yes, I did actually already.
Oh.
But I somebody was saying about, this is also true of children that have other abilities, just different abilities, or children with disabilities. In that video, I don't know if you remember this, and then we're going to stop because we want you to share. But in that video, there's that scene where there's a woman in a wheelchair. And the little girl approaches her and says, to her mother, what's wrong with her? And the mom goes, shh, we don't want to, right? And so, and you see a woman's face, and she's just devastated, well, as a parent, my daughter, when she was about 4, we were at Hughes at this market that she called Huggies. We saw a man in a wheelchair. And she asked me, Mom, why is he in that chair? And I'm so grateful that I had that anti-bias video, because instead of me doing what I thought was right, because we don't want to call attention, that's what I learned growing up, I got to change the trajectory and to say to her, I don't know, maybe, let's ask him. And she did. She went over and she asked him, and he said to me, thank you so much. People look at me like I'm invisible. And my heart, I was so grateful to do that. And now I get to see my daughter parenting, and she's inclusive with her child. I mean, we can change this if we work on it. But really quick, I just want to show you that, look who's the person, like Louise Dorman Sparks, right? There's this guide. It gives you, all these, like, check the illustrations, look for stereotypes. And it's not just talking about race, it's talking about gender, it's talking about disabilities, it's talking, are LGBTQ people invisible? These are all things that children have the capacity to learn about. I love this, we tend to think like there's the model minority, and Asians are often thought of in that way, except obviously the horrible things that have been happening in their community since COVID, the hate that's happening. But how are we talking about them in ways that are inclusive, not othering. Like they're not Oriental, right? They're Asian, they're not exotic. They're just, this is the food they eat. It's that we have to be really cognizant of that. So I'm going to stop. Michelle, if you have anything you want to add, I want to offer, we have about 20 minutes more left of our time together, and I want to, see what other people would like to share.
So if anything we've said tonight has resonated with you, if you have questions, if there's anything that you'd like to have more information about, we'd love to open it up and just have a dialogue. You can either raise your hand, use the reaction to raise your hand. And like Brenda just did, I'll call you in just 1 second. And then that way you go to the front. If you just raise your hand physically, we might not see you. Or of course you can put a question in the chat, and we'd love to just have a conversation. This is a learning community. We all learn from each other here. Brenda, what you got?
So I wasn't sure whether or not to share this here, but I'm gonna go for it. So I work at Saddleback College, and one of the other professors and I have been building a curriculum resource for faculty, and we are going to launch it this spring after we share it with our conference that we're having for directors. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there, that if you're interested in having this resource, it is going to be put on Canvas as an open resource for everybody to share. And we're going to try and put it out into the community. So perhaps I'll send it to you all and you can add it to your resources for people to share as well. But it will cover all of the different areas, for example, that are on Louise Dermenspark, her book, right? But also other things to consider, like how to do this curriculum in the college classroom, how to develop yourself, and so on. So it's not a perfect resource. We're going to ask people to contribute. If you have other things to share, we will add what you have. And hopefully between all of us, we can build a resource, that is useful for everybody.
Brenda, I'm happy to share some resources with you too that I have. Are you working that with Christina?
No, I'm working on it with Katrina. It's one of our faculty. She and I have been working on it for about a year, but between doing our other work. But we're really excited about it.
Brenda, do you want to put your email in the chat so that I can, because I have a plethora of resources that I'm happy to share with you. And that would be great to then put that in there was a question that just came to me. So I just want to tell you that this PowerPoint, this is taped. All of the resources are going to be housed on a Canvas Canvas shell that you will all have access to. So we will be putting more resources up for you to dive into. Sasha, you have your hand up.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I just want to say thank you so much for, doing this and reminding us of many things some of us already know, but I too went to Pacific Oaks and I did take an anti-bias class and it was amazing. And through that, I learned so many things. And so when I had my own classroom, I made sure to have things that represented not only the children in the community, but, children everywhere. I am Belizean and I look like a dark brown girl with big curls. And we had dolls that looked like that. And I just, when I saw that video, it just reminded me of the children in my classroom because they were obsessed with the brown baby that looked like Miss Sasha that they wanted so badly. And so, yeah, and these children were Hispanic children and Caucasian children. And so it just brought a lot of joy to me that, just that exposure through what we're bringing to them is what, they learn through. So I just want to share that bit with you guys.
Thank you.
Anyone brave enough to share a hard question, to share something that they're uncomfortable with, anything that maybe they were enlightened by tonight, or something they're still confused about that they might feel uncomfortable sharing, but they'll be brave enough to share anyway.
No judgment here.
Absolutely not. As Cindy said earlier, I teach a lot about being on a journey, an anti-racist journey. And we're all, like Cindy said earlier, we're all at different stages of this journey. There is no, we've arrived. No one is perfect, and it is a continuous learning process.
Well, I have a comment not related to that, as long as we're waiting for someone to, to give a comment. But years ago, when I had my preschools, we were talking about Rosa Parks and how she was at the back of the bus, and you all know the story. And it was a book about her. And so we had the children, they were talking about it and everything. We had a dramatic play corner, and we listened to what happened. The kids decided to reenact the Rosa Parks story. I had one of the teachers didn't want them to do that because she thought the parents would be upset, because it is a predominantly upper class white neighborhood with the clientele were. And so I said, no, let's see what the children are doing. Let's just listen and learn. So we listened to the children, they had their roles. Then it came to the part of who was going to play Rosa Parks and sit in the back of the bus. All the children became very uncomfortable. Nobody wanted to do it. No, you be Rosa. No, you be Rosa. One little girl said, I'm going to be Rosa, but I'm not sitting in the back of the bus. Then they decided that it wasn't right to have anybody sit in the back of the bus, that people could sit where they wanted to. And they put the stuffed dolls in the back of the bus, and everybody else came up front. And so we talked about that later. What I'd like to share is, don't forget the dramatic play corner is also a place to allow children to learn about each other, to learn about race, to learn to reenact what's happening in the world. And it's our opportunity to look at what they're doing and to assist them in their journey, not to squelch it because somebody might be uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable. That's the learning zone. That's how you know you're going to learn something. If it's comfortable, that's exercise. The brain exercises when it's comfortable. When the brain is uncomfortable, we're in the learning zone. So don't forget that the learning, if you're uncomfortable, what are you learning? What do you need to learn? What else can you do to do that? So use dramatic play, my only comment.
I would even go further to say, not only is dramatic play also the learning, the environment for that, I would say dramatic play is the environment for that, right? That children act out try to make sense of their world by doing just that, right? By acting out, by what they see, by mimicking the behaviors of the people around them in their world. And that is exactly what's happening there. And absolutely, Regina, we as educators need to be right in the middle of all of that and seeing where they are, what they're doing, how they're responding to each other, and how they're reenacting and trying to make sense of their world.
And oh, I'm sorry, Maria, you can't hear us. She's saying she's having problems with her internet. I want to add to what you said, Michelle and Regina, and that is that I love that story, Regina, because nobody interfered and told that children that someone's going to have to sit in the back of the bus, right? You let them decide what makes sense for them. And then you could even be talking about, isn't that interesting that nobody wanted to sit in the back of the bus? How do you think that, other people felt, right? I mean, those are empathy building experiences that we can let children have, and we don't have to interfere because they're working it out. They're making sense of it for themselves. And I'm sure that I think the last one, and Martine, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that the last one is about observing children through a cultural lens, through a critical lens. And that's the place, right? We have to be careful not to just jump to conclusions. I see Carmen's hand up, so I don't want to keep talking. Go ahead, Carmen.
I just wanted to share something that happened at the program where I work. We do daily observations on the children, and we do share them with the parents. My lead teacher shared an observation about a little boy who was working in the dramatic play area, and he was pretending to be the mom. And when the mom read the observation, she became very upset because her son should not be pretending to be the mom. He is a boy and he should be pretending to be the dad. I took it upon myself to speak to the parent, and I said, you know what? The dramatic play area is like we were talking about, an area where they get to explore different things. And he is with you most of the time. He idolizes you. He wants to imitate what the teachings that you do and how you take care of him. And so that's what he was doing. It has nothing to do with his sexuality or anything else that might have been going on in the mom's head. But would you have, what would you have told the parent in that instance? I was wondering if somebody had some good ideas for that.
I would have said exactly what you said. I think you hit the nail on the head. You responded absolutely dead on. You were absolutely right in your response. I think we as adults often project adult thoughts and adult actions onto young children. And you were right. His episode of dramatic play had nothing to do with sexuality. It was 100% about him loving his mom and doing what his mom does.
If he were mimicking a dog, barking like a dog and pretend to be a dog, does that mean that he really wants to be a dog and not a human? He just loved what the dog was doing and thought he would experiment with it. I've had a child do that. So I think a lot of times we label something with our stuff. This is all about us, our feelings, our beliefs, our biases. We're labeling what we believe and we're putting it onto children. I think it's important to help parents see that. I've done the same thing, is that he actually was appreciating her, and to label it as something else, I think it's premature, and just that's something that's probably not where the child was coming from.
And one of the things that I think was so beautiful about us doing this together is that we were able to talk with one another and process things. And Carmen, that's an opportunity that you have as well, like to talk with your colleagues, because another thing is, yes, he appreciates what his mom does. But we don't want to only, like, what if, like, there could be a possibility that, maybe there is some gender issues there. And I don't mean issues. I shouldn't even call them issues. So I think we need to be mindful of that, as well as to not, like if it were a girl acting like their father, I'm sure that wouldn't have happened. I'm sure, I can almost guarantee that mom wouldn't have said, oh, I bet she wants to be, but we care so much more about what boys do when they cross gender, what we think is gender related. So, we're here talking about culturally responsible practices, but part of being culturally responsible is being gender responsible too, right? Is to allow children to have that freedom to explore and to not label them, because it doesn't mean, when children explore different ideas, it doesn't mean what their orientation is going to be. But it also doesn't mean that that's a possibility. So, we don't want to limit children. We don't want to, what you said, Michelle, today, and I'm going to kind of, about how you want to be seen. Children want to be seen. We all want to be seen for who we are, not what you think I'm supposed to be, right? And so being an early learning professional affords us the opportunity to see children when we open our hearts and our minds.
I agree. And Eva commented about, that it's important to take the time to think about a response. Yep. You're right. You don't need to respond right away. And that goes back to what Cindy said about pause, right? And we don't have to respond right away. You could, if she didn't have a response, but I think she responded beautifully.
I think her response was good too. And she also could have asked the mom, what's her concerns?
That's, that came to my mind too. When, we're talking about, like you said, we do really think about how our children's behavior relates to their sexuality, even at a young age. In my question, I have asked the question, what's your fear?
Yeah.
And so like, if it did have to do with his sexuality, then, well, but that's another conversation.
I think we have
I'm
about
sorry.
10 more minutes, and I
Yeah,
know
I have
that
a
we
question
need
that
you.
came to me that I want to address.
Okay.
It says, how do we help the white culture talk about their children? I'm sorry, how do we help the white culture talk about their culture as neither better nor ashamed of their culture? And that is a question that has come up a lot, you know, especially there's all of this pushback politically in terms of teaching critical race theory to young children, right? Well, first of all, I want to make a statement, and I hope everyone hears me. We do not teach critical race theory to children. Critical race theory is a theory that is taught at grad level education. It is not taught to children. Now, what a lot of people name critical race theory is just teaching regular old accurate history. That is teaching accurate, truthful history. That's not critical race theory. So, you know, one thing that I have shared a lot is this story that I listened to this podcast, and there was an episode in the podcast where the journalist asked a third grade teacher. Now, third grade is at the high end of early childhood education, right? And she was talking about the Dakota Indians and the war in the 1800s, and he asked her, how do you teach such young children about this, you know, the war of 1812 and the Dakota Indians, and you know, what do you say to them? They're in third grade. And she said, well, you know, what we teach them is that there was a conflict, and the Indians, the only way they knew how to solve conflict was to fight. And, you know, we don't fight when we have conflict, we use our words, but they only knew how to fight. And the white settlers had to defend themselves, and people were killed. Whoa. So, whoa, you know, when we think about, so if we deconstruct that, what's being taught in our classrooms in terms of racist curriculum, right? And why when we perpetuate this notion of Native Americans being savages, and they didn't know how to solve conflict, and they only knew how to fight, and people were killed. Well, who was killed and by whom? And then the white settlers had to defend themselves against the Native Americans. So the way this whole story is skewed, right? The way that children are taught inaccurately, and kind of sugar-coated, right? When we really want to teach what happened in history, when we talk about slavery, when we talk about Jim Crow, when we talk about segregation, when we talk about racism, there are many people who don't want these things taught in school, and they say that it makes children be ashamed of being white. Well, I don't believe that's true. And I also want to flip that question around. So when we're talking about Native Americans, when we're doing art projects at Thanksgiving time, when we're making paper headbands with feathers attached to them, when we're doing these types of things in the name of children just having fun, I don't see the concern of Native children being ashamed of their culture, or Black children being ashamed of their culture, being sad and not feeling good about being who they are because of these topics. But when we talk about white supremacy, when we talk about slavery, when we talk about oppression, then there's this talk about, well, we can't say those things because it's going to make white children feel bad. And so so my response to that would be, when we are talking about just, it's important for children, for students, for adults to understand the history of our country and why we talk about segregation, and why we talk about inequities in education, and why some people have higher opportunities than others. When we talk about these things and we really understand, like Regina was saying in our presentation, where our biases come from, that we've all been socialized in this country that was built on whiteness and white supremacy, and where we normalize white dominant culture, then we can understand where all of our biases come from, and then why we have to work to unlearn some things. Right.
I think more important for me than that is that when you look at it, what happened in slavery, what happened to the Native Americans, people shouldn't feel good about it. That's totally appropriate. That's a human emotion. How can we learn to empathize with people if we don't learn what feels bad or how it feels to care? And I think what they're not understanding is their children are learning how to care. Feeling sad helps you. I mean, they should be sad of what happened to Native Americans, not that their ancestors may have caused it, but the fact that it happened at all.
Right, and I agree with you.
I'm not Jewish, but I'm terribly saddened when I went to Germany. That's one thing that bugged me the most. I wouldn't go to East Germany, although probably West Germany wasn't any better. I didn't go to Eastern Germany because I was just so upset about what happened to the Jewish people there. I have empathy for that happening. I don't want it to happen again. I'm going to teach my children what I can so it doesn't happen again. If we don't learn about all these ugly things that cause us angst, then we can repeat them. They shouldn't. We should feel bad.
And you're right. And I agree with you 100%. They should feel bad, and they should feel bad that this happened to hundreds, millions of people. That's different than, because I feel bad that this happened, is what we do want them to learn. Our intention is not to make you feel bad for being white. That is not, and that's what the discourse is. And that's where it's distinguished. And thank you for that, Regina.
Feel bad so you don't repeat it.
Absolutely.
Well, and it's not only feeling bad, it's having empathy for humanity.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's what we want to teach children. And trust me, children have that naturally. We actually teach it out of them by the things that they are exposed to. So this has been a great workshop. We're so grateful that you've been here. You've given 2 hours of your time on what is it, Wednesday night? This week's so crazy. Thank you so much for being here. We hope that you took away some nuggets, that you continue to have these conversations. I know that Barbara will be following up and providing you the link to the Canvas resource, but also she's also put in the survey, and we really need your thoughts on this workshop. And I don't know if you want to say something, Martine, as our director of this program, but it's an important part of our funding, and also an important part of quality assurance. So we want your feedback, and if you could please do the survey, we'd really appreciate it. Go ahead, Martine.
Thank you for the opportunity, Cindy, but I'm going to say follow that. I mean, it's really hard. So I'm going to do a very formal closure with just a couple of thoughts. I really want to thank the facilitators. I'm asking myself what resonates with me tonight, and there's a lot. I could write a paper on it. I'm grateful to be part of this program. I'm really grateful to be part of the Peach community because of how much I've learned and continue to learn from my colleagues here. We hope you'll join us too at Peach. I loved the acronym tonight, so I'd like to repeat that. Postpone activity until serenity emerges. And it reminded me of my 2 years at the University of Alaska, where wait time was significantly increased from my home city of London. And it taught me, listen, and of course, labels. Babies are not born with labels, right? We know that, but they learn them along the way. And so I want to thank everyone, and you, the participants, especially, for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again. Barb has posted the link for any of your comments. Please go there, and we look forward to seeing you in future workshops. We also value your evaluations. And have a lovely evening, everyone. And thank you for spending a couple of hours with Peach tonight. Thank you, Cindy, Michelle, and Regina, for all that you've done. And thank you, Barbara and Nancy, who have been there in the background, making sure that technology works for us. Thank you and have a very good evening. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.